I hope you're all doing good on this Monday morning. We are officially in summer, so that's great. All right, I think we can get started. It looks like we hit some critical mass, so that's fantastic. I'm so grateful and excited to have so many of you be part of this convening. Truly, thank you for taking time, this morning or afternoon if you're joining from a different time zone. I am Rati Sudhakara, and my pronouns are she, her. I am an associate director on the strategy and partnerships team here at the Washington Student Achievement Council, or WASAC for short. I do want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the land I'm on and acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples. As a first generation immigrant, I feel so grateful to call this corner of earth also home, knowing that this land has been walked on, worshipped, and nurtured by the Coast Salish peoples since time immemorial. They continue to steward these lands and waters while creating, shaping, and contributing to our thriving communities. I invite you to make an acknowledgement in your introductions if you feel like it. With that, let's start with some quick housekeeping. Next slide, please. So yes, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared. We have built in some time for Q&A, but not a whole lot. We have a packed agenda. So please use the Q&A function that you have on the bottom of your screen to ask questions. If we can't get to it during the webinar, we'll be sure to respond later. Also, please use the chat function to introduce yourself. You can share your name, the organization you're with if you want, location, pronouns, and land acknowledgement if you feel like it. Also, do use the chat to engage with other attendees. I will request you to stay on mute, but of course, feel free to turn your video on. Can we go to the next slide, please? With that, let's do a quick poll. I would love to see who are all here with me today. Thank you for launching the poll, Abby. You should be seeing that on your screen now. Basically, yeah, how would you describe your affiliation to the work of enrollment and higher education? Note that you can choose actually more than one option. We all wear many different hats, so please feel free to choose multiple roles. I see folks are beginning to choose, yeah, maybe multiple rows. That's fantastic. We'll give it a few more seconds. Maybe a couple more seconds. Yeah. Almost there. We have about 85% of our participants who have responded. Maybe, yeah, we can go ahead and share results. All right, as you can see, it's truly wonderful. We have a very diverse set of participants here today. And I know folks may be still joining. I see folks from the K-12 sector, from the higher education sector, nonprofits, as well as, researchers. And I'm very curious who the others are, but I do want to also shout out, we have a few, looks like policymakers as well. So thank you all so much again for making time today. And so, yeah, we can go to the next slide. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to start with some quick intros from two amazing speakers. I'm so glad that they could make it. Then we will dive into the past, look at some historical trends. Next, we get to peer into the crystal ball. No, just kidding. But we will see what the future holds, get some insights driven by data. I would say that's better than a crystal ball. We will then come back to reality, acknowledge the astounding times we are living in, And I know that's a whole lot. So we will take a quick stock of what we've heard so far. Then I think answer this or try to answer this question, right? Knowing all of this, understanding the landscape that we are in right now, what do we do now? We will be using a behavioral science lens, specifically what's called the intention action gap, among other things. And so, yeah, I'm sure, you'll get very familiar with it by the end of this conversation. And then, of course, wrap up. So that's our agenda, and we can go to the next slide. So yeah, I see a lot of familiar names and faces, which is fantastic. I also see new people, which is really like great. If there's anyone here who's not familiar with WASAC, we are a cabinet level state agency, and our mission is to advance educational attainment in Washington. How do we do this? We engage in this work by leading the statewide strategic planning. I want to emphasize that we are truly stewards of the plan that you all and many other stakeholders in the state help create. This plan also includes strategy around educational transitions, like from high school to college or apprenticeship. We also administer state financial aid programs like the Washington College Grant and college savings plans like Guaranteed Education Tuition or the GET program. And more broadly, we advocate for the benefits of post-secondary education. So that's who WASAC is. And we can jump to the next slide. Yeah, so before we dive in, I want to express my gratitude to Colleen from WICHE and Dan from Ideas 42 for being here and sharing their expertise with us. Please jump in and introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Colleen Falkenstern. I am from the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, WICHE. We are a regional interstate compact that was formed over 70 years ago, and we promote access and excellence in higher education for all residents of the West. We work in partnership with Washington as they are within the WICHE region, and happy to be sharing more about one of our data products knocking at the college door today later on and talk about the future of high school graduates in Washington.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Rosica, Senior Behavioral Designer at Ideas 42. I'll explain what Ideas 42 is when it's my turn to speak, but I'm excited to be here to share what we've learned and designed in partnership with WASAC.
Thank you, Colleen and Dan. I also want to truly thank my two amazing colleagues. I know many of you know them, Abby Chen and Amy Magasos, for supporting me here behind the scenes. So thank you so much. And if you can go to the next slide, we have one quick interactive poll before we jump in. So the question you're going to be answering is, how many unread emails do you have in your work inbox today? So if we can, yeah, so there it is. You have the poll. I know this may seem like a bit of a strange question, but indulge me. And I will tell you why I think this is a good icebreaker for today. I will go ahead and share that I am not one of those people with 0 unread emails in my inbox. And obviously, there is no right answer. Thank you for participating. Just give it a beat. All right. So maybe we can share results. Yeah, I'm amazed that we have 19% who are actually have 0 emails in their inbox. That's fantastic. But I guess it's no surprise that most of us do have, unread emails. There's also a lot of research that shows that having unread emails, unfortunately, can lead to lower productivity. I myself experience some level of stress because of this, and I'm, guessing that most of you do as well. But here's the thing: each of us have the intention to have clean inboxes, but for good reasons, and honestly, very good reasons, we're not able to act on that enough to achieve that goal. That's the intention action gap, and that's absolutely normal. It's human. Of course, what we're going to be talking about today is post-secondary enrollment, which is much more complex than just clearing your inbox. But these are the types of problems behavioral design is well positioned to address. So as we go through today's session, keep this question in mind. Who already has the intention, and how can we redesign the context to help them follow through? Next slide, please. All right, so let's get this conversation started with a look at some historical trends. Next slide. So what you're looking at here are the NAEP scores. NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, often called the nation's report card. It's the largest nationally representative assessment in math, English, and other subjects. This is administered every 2 years for English and math. So what you're looking on the left here are the trends in math achievement levels for 8th grade public school students in Washington. Overall, you can see that the horizontal bars have slightly moved towards the left. What that indicates is that more students are at NAEP basic level or below, unfortunately. We see a more significant shift if you pay close attention right after the pandemic. In 2019, about 60% of students were at NAEP basic or below. But if you see the topmost bar on the left side, in 2024, 71% were at NAEP basic or below. Now, if you look to your right, what this is showing are trends in reading achievement levels for 8th grade public school students in Washington. Similarly, if you look at the broad movement of the horizontal bars from bottom to top, you see that it's slightly shifted towards the left, indicating that more students are at NAEP basic or below in recent years. Again, in 2019, 62% of students were at NAEP basic or below. In 2024, the topmost bar shifted a little more to the left. 69% of students are at NAEP basic or below. So if you can go to the next slide, we'll take a look at some state assessments, what's called the Smarter Balanced assessments. These are administered every year. And what you're looking at here are ELA, that's English language, arts, and math proficiencies for grades 3 to 8. So all the way from 3rd grade to 8th grade. The blue bars indicate the language art results, which dropped significantly after the pandemic in 2021. And in 2023, less than 50% of students are proficient, well below the pre-pandemic levels. The green bars indicate math results, and the drop in proficiency levels is even more stark here after the pandemic in 2021. And we are making some progress, but as recent as 2023, just over 40% of students were proficient. If we can go to the next slide. When we break this data down by race and ethnicity, I know there's a lot going on in that slide there, but you can see overall that the variation in proficiencies is large among the different race and ethnicities. If you pay attention to the red-green overlapping line in the top graph, what that shows is that for the most recent year, less than 35% of Black and Hispanic students were considered proficient in ELA. And if you look at this, that's those similar red and green overlapping lines on the bottom graph. What that is showing is that in the most recent year, that's in 2023, just about 23% of Black and Hispanic students were considered proficient in math. So, of course, from both these slides, we see that there's huge variation and these trends are concerning. If we go to the next slide, a good, slightly shifting, a different indicator, but a good indicator of post-secondary interest is dual credit participation. Students who enroll in dual credit courses in high school have a greater likelihood of pursuing post-secondary education. What you're looking at here is the 2023 statewide cohort enrollment in dual credit courses. The very top bar shows that 90% of students enrolled in at least one type of dual credit course during their high school journey. And the highest enrollment was in CTE, that's Career and Technical Education dual credit course. That's the second bar at 76%. With advanced placement, that's an exam-based dual credit, and college in the high school, which is on the second from the bottom, having the second highest enrollment, so around 39 and 35% respectively. We can go to the next slide. So, all right, are you ready for a friendly quiz? And if you can launch the quiz, awesome. So here's the question. In the past decade, which type of dual credit do you think saw an increase in participation rates year over year? I'm just going to repeat that. In the whole past decade, which type of dual credit do you think saw an increase in participation rates year over year? Take a guess. I see folks responding, which is fantastic. And it seems like we have some mixed opinions, as we should. We are a very diverse group of people. All right, I think we can share results. Okay, let me just make sure I'm looking at all of this. Okay, so it looks like the folks who thought like the highest, popular opinion is Running Start, followed by college in the high school. The answer is college in the high school. And so if we can go to the next slide. Pay attention to that yellow line. That's college in the high school. College in the high school has consistently increased year after year, starting with just about 14% in 2015 to 35% in 2023. There's something interesting happening here. One, this increasing trend began well before the passage of Senate Bill 5048, which went into effect in September 2023. What that bill did or does now is that it's actually made college in the high school even more accessible, free for students who are attending public schools, taking college in the high school courses with public institutions. Now, another interesting thing is take a look at those gray lines. I grayed them out for better visibility of the college in the high school trend. But if you pay attention to the gray lines, all of them are pretty much straight, right? That's indicating that enrollment in all other types has pretty much held steady for a whole decade. I have to say this since we're talking about behavioral science today. One possible explanation is that among all types of dual credit, college in the high school has the least friction, especially for students from low income backgrounds and most marginalized. Students get to take these classes within their high school taught by their own teachers. No exams, no worries about transportation, etc. That's just one possible explanation that could be explaining this. So with that, let's go to the next slide. What you're seeing here is another indicator, which is the high school graduation rates disaggregated by race and ethnicity. The good news is that on average, they've held steady above 80% for the past decade. What's interesting and a positive trend, if you look closely, is that variation in high school graduation rates have actually decreased in the past 10 years. You see that the lines going from left to right are converging. So that is a good sign for us. And so if you can go to the next slide. This graph shows direct enrollment rate. That is, what's the percentage of students who pursue some sort of post-secondary education within a year of graduating high school. It's not very clear in this graph because I've already disaggregated it by race and ethnicity, but Washington saw, unfortunately, a 10% drop in this rate during the pandemic. It went from 60% in 2019 to about 50% post-pandemic. Since has made some recovery, and in 2023, it reached about 55%, still below pandemic levels. But where I really want to draw your attention is to the variation you see in the graph. The lines are unfortunately diverging. On the one hand, we have Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students' direct enrollment rate is as low as 28%. That's the purple line on the very bottom. American Indian and Alaskan Native students' rate is at about 34%, the orange line, and Hispanic students' direct enrollment rate is at 46%, still below 50%. And of course, on the very other end of the spectrum are Asian students' direct enrollment rate, which is at 80%. One other point I want to make is that all the students not represented in this graph also had intentions to pursue post-secondary education. But real barriers are stopping them from acting on those intentions. We will explore this in more detail later. So if you can go to the next slide. One last interesting data point from the K-12 side. Where do students go after graduating high school? In-state or out of state? What you're looking at here are trends in in-state enrollment. The first column shows enrollment into public institutions. 4 years in blue on top and 2 years in gold or yellow on the bottom. You can see that both these graphs are beginning to trend upwards, right? And the second column shows in-state enrollment into private colleges that's mostly held steady. We're still looking at the second column, yeah. And so now we're also seeing on the right out-of-state enrollments. The first column shows enrollment into out-of-state public institutions, 4-year in blue on top and 2-year in gold and yellow. You can see that the 4-year out-of-state trends are just beginning to trend downwards. Similarly, the second column shows the out-of-state enrollment into private colleges. And here too, for the 4 years, just in the last few years, we are starting to see a declining trend. So with that, we will look at 2 data points from the higher education side, shifting gears a little bit. What you're looking at here are fall enrollment trends for Washington public institutions. Very quickly, the orange line shows that community and technical colleges experienced a 12% rise in enrollment from 22 to 24. And during the same period, the blue line shows that our public 4 years experienced a slight decline, about 3%. And if we go to the next slide, here what you're seeing are trends in students at community and technical colleges receiving need-based aid versus those who don't get any financial aid. So if you pay attention to the peach colored line, the line on the bottom, from 22 to 24, 30% more students received need-based aid at our community and technical colleges. And what you'll see on the last slide on historical trends, next slide, is that at our 4-year publics, the bottom line, 4 more percent of students received need-based aid from 22 to 24. That's the dark blue line on the bottom. I know I've shared a lot of information with you all, and of course, I don't expect you to, remember all of this. So let's do a quick summary on the next slide. We are seeing some positive trends, and we're also seeing some concerning trends as well. Let's look at the positive trends. We are seeing an increased participation in dual credit, specifically college in the high school, and this trend began well before that policy change I mentioned earlier. We're also beginning to see more enrollment within state and slight declines in out-of-state enrollment. Thanks to the generosity of our legislature, expanded financial aid for sure looks like it helped. It likely prevented what would have otherwise been a greater pandemic-induced decrease in enrollment. Looking at concerning trends, math and ELA scores have declined. Math is a little bit more concerning. And we are seeing an increased variation in direct enrollment when disaggregated by race and ethnicity. That's probably the most concerning trend we need to pay attention to. So how do we tackle this, especially knowing students have the intention to pursue? With that, I will pass it to Colleen.
Hi, so I'm going to go ahead on the next slide, talk a little bit of background on the data that I'll share today. So as I mentioned, I'm coming from the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, or WICHE. And since 1979, WICHE has been releasing a series of projections of high school graduates called Knocking at the College Door. These data are the projections of the number of high school graduates. So Will Rothley has shown trends in high school graduation rates. These are projections of the numbers of high school graduates. And I will share in a moment our website, which has a lot more details on the methodology, the data where we get the data that we collect. But by and large, the data for high school graduates are collected from state agencies or within each state. And we produce these series of projections about every 4 years. The most recent edition came out in December of 2024. And it's interesting because if you go back to our very first edition in 1979, there's this quote from WICHE's executive director that says, "These enrollment factors and the pressures of inflation and constraints on government funds combine to present the most perplexing set of issues to face higher education planners and administrators in a generation." Which is very interesting since that was from a quote from 1979 and could be true in 2025 as well. And so these data are sort of one data point, because I do think what is different in 2025 than it was in 1979 is we have more data at our fingertips to make better informed decision making. So while there might be a future of fewer high school graduates, we have the agency and we have the data to make better informed decision making, to invest in the strategies, the policies that are working, to increase access and increase success. So on the next slide, I'm going to start by just taking a look at the national trends before diving further into Washington. So this chart here shows the number of high school graduates. Those in the darker shades represent the reported actual number of high school graduates from 2009 through 2023. And then the lighter shades show the projection of high school graduates. And so as you can see, nationally, we were at about 3.3 million high school graduates in 2009 and expected to peak in 2025 at around 3.9 million high school graduates. So that's current graduating class from this year. And then you see that there's expected reversal of trends to about 3.4 million high school graduates. Sometimes these data are used and discussed around an idea of a demographic cliff. However, we don't use that terminology to describe these data. Rather, yes, there is a reversal of trends, but it is not a quick and swift drop off in the number of high school graduates, but a future of a sustained fewer number of high school graduates. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what's driving these trends. So here you see, similarly, number of high school graduates in green from around 3.3 million to 3.4 million high school graduates. But included on this chart is a blue line, which represents the number of babies born nationally. So in the early 1990s, we had about 4.1 million babies born annually. In 2023, we see 3.6 million babies born. The number of babies born peaked in 2007, right before the Great Recession, which corresponds with a peak in high school graduates in 2025, about 18 years later. I do want to highlight that if you look at the beginning of these trends, in the early 1990s, we see that there was a reduction in the number of babies born, but 18 years later, there was not a reduction in high school graduates in a similar rate, and actually an increasing number of high school graduates. And one of those reasons is something that Rothy touched on in terms of increasing high school graduation rates. And I highlight that because while there might be fewer high school graduates coming down, and that impacts K-12, post-secondary workforce, there are policies and interventions that can mitigate some of these declines. And so what we saw from around 2010 through 2019 was an increase in number of high school graduates, in large part due to increased high school graduation rates. So more students were staying in school till high school graduation and able to mitigate some of those expected declines from fewer babies born 18 years prior. So, and it's just a thread throughout that I'll try to highlight is that there are opportunities for investment into these type of strategies to mitigate, and there is not kind of a total negative outlook when you see fewer high school graduates coming. On the next slide, I'll look at, these are the national trends for high school graduates by race ethnicity. When we talk about race ethnicity in our data, that is only for public high school graduates. We don't have the data for private high school graduates by race ethnicity. So nationally, the largest population is white public high school graduates, which were about 1.6 million in the class of 2023 and expected to decline to about 1.2 million by the class of 2041. Hispanic high school graduates is the second largest population nationally and projected to increase from around 944,000 to over 1 million high school graduates in the class of 2041. So actually relatively close in number to the number of white high school graduates by the end of the projections. Black high school graduates are projected to decrease from around 480,000 down to 372,000. And nationally, the Asian and Native Hawaiian other Pacific Islander population is projected to decline, which is not necessarily the case in Washington, which I will highlight. And then the multiracial or two or more race population projected to increase, which is also a difference in trend than what you'll see in Washington's data. Nationally, the smallest population is American and Alaska Native high school graduates, which are projected to decrease from about 30,000 to fewer than 18,000 nationally over the course of the projections. On the next slide, as you can see, there's quite a variation in these trends across the nation. And so this just shows a heat map of the percent change of high school graduates from the class of 2023 through the class of 2041. Anything in blue represents an increase, and anything in the orange color represents a decrease. And so as you can see, much of the increase is isolated to the southeast part of the country, where you see states like Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee projected to have double-digit increases over the course of the projections, and then some increases in Idaho, Montana, and North and South Dakota. Washington is projected to decrease by about 8%, which compared to the nation, which is projected to increase by 10%, it's a lower rate of change. And as well as other states in the West, such as California, Oregon, Hawaii, Alaska, all projected to see larger decreases than the state of Washington. So now diving in a little bit more on the next slide into these trends for Washington. This is similar to that very first chart I showed for the US, but just looks at Washington's high school graduates. The smaller line represents those reported actuals, and then you move into the projected, starting with the class of 2023 for public high school graduates and the class of 2022 for private and total high school graduates. So as you can see, Washington follows very similarly to the nation in an increasing number of high school graduates, kind of a stalling over the past several years during COVID, but projected to reach a high point of high school graduates in the class of 2026, and then see a declining number of high school graduates to about 73,000, about 74,000. So pretty similar number in the class of 2041 as there was in the class of 2016. Private high school graduates projected to increase over the course of these projections. So similar to the nation, what's driving these trends, you see the longer term view of that projected number of reported and projected number of high school graduates, as well as births. So Washington had a little bit of a resurgence in the number of babies born in 2015, but you really see at that tail end of the number of babies born from 2015 through 2023, that declining number of babies born and how that corresponds with the longer term view of high school graduates in the later years of our projection series. When looking at Washington's public high school graduates by race ethnicity, really the driver of the declines in Washington is the projected decline in the number of white public high school graduates. So in 2023, which there's a lot of numbers on here and a lot, but the first year in this chart is 2023. About 39,000 white public high school graduates, and that number is projected to decrease to about 26,000. 400 white public high school graduates. And then where you see there are growing populations are Hispanic high school graduates projected to increase from around 18,000 to 21,000. And then the Asian and Native Hawaiian other Pacific Islander population projected to increase by about 3,000 over the course of the projections. Where you do see declines are among the multiracial or the two or more race populations, as well as the American Indian Alaska Native. And a slight increase among the Black high school graduate population. When looking at the percent change you see for the race ethnicities, and I do want to highlight that due to data limitations, we can only separate out the Asian and Native Hawaiian other Pacific Islander populations through class of 2034. But in terms of percentage change, a Native Hawaiian other Pacific Islander population is among the fastest growing of high school graduate populations for the state. Although in the combined total, majority of the population is among the Asian population, which is projected to increase by about 22% through the class of 2034. But for that combined total projected increase of about 45% over the course of the projections, which is quite different than the national trends, which is actually projected to decrease, as well as other states like California and Hawaii that have large Asian, Native Hawaiian, other Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations are projected to see decreases. Another key difference from the nation is the 18% increase in Hispanic high school graduates is higher than the rate of change for the nation. But where you see that significant decline is in the 33% projected decline of white high school graduates on that blue line. The next chart shows basically the same trend, but puts the numbers behind that. So looking at the change from the class of 2023 through the class of 2041, it just really shows the scale at the rate of change among the white public high school graduates. It's just not enough to offset the growth and pretty strong growth among the Asian, Pacific Islander, and the Hispanic population over the course of the projections. And so it just kind of adds the scale behind those percentage changes. And the last thing I'll note on here when looking at Washington is this shows the projected share of the total from the class of 2023 to the class of 2041. So as the population of high school graduates from the state is expected to contract and decrease over the course of the projections, you see that current graduating class is about 50% of graduates were white public high school graduates, and that number is projected to decrease to about 36% of the total. And you see that increase of Hispanic high school graduates in the green from 23 to 29%, and strong increase in the share of the total from Asian, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander from 9 to 14%. So about over 40% of high school graduates projected to be in the class of 2041, either Hispanic or Asian Pacific Islander. And so a diversifying population while also decreasing in numbers. And so just to wrap up these slides, the projected rate of decline in Washington is expected to be 8%, which is less than the nation overall. And then the projected, but where you see the difference from the nation is the projected decrease among white high school graduates at 33% is greater than the nation's projected rate of decrease among the population at 26%. The larger increases among Asian, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, and Hispanic high school graduates, much larger than what we're seeing nationally. And the last point that I'll add is that demography to be not destiny. And I think that these data are good for this presentation as they highlight some of the other work that's being done in Washington, where these are just one data point. And while there might be a future with fewer high school graduates, I think there's opportunity to identify what is working in the state of Washington and invest in those strategies and policies that are going to increase access and success in the future. And so I'm going to.
Thank you, Colleen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those great insights. I feel like we're giving you all a lot of information, and I just saw a question whether these slides will be shared. Yes, they will be shared as well. Let's look at some current impacts now. I will briefly highlight what we are seeing or have seen at the federal, state, and local levels. So we'll start with the federal level. If we can just click once. The headline, as I'm sure we are all experiencing, is instability. To touch upon a few of those things, we saw a $21.6 million cut to the Washington AmeriCorps program by the Trump administration, thanks to Nick Brown, our Attorney General, who joined 23 other AGs from across the country and sought an injunction to immediately stop the closure of these programs. And one, we are back to receiving AmeriCorps funding. AmeriCorps is relevant to this conversation because it includes essential supports for students to prepare and transition into post-secondary pathways, opportunities. What I'll also share a little bit is the proposed budget by the White House, which I believe has passed the House and is under negotiation in the Senate, with a need for final reconciliation among the chambers. There are differences in the Senate and House versions, not going deep into that, but at a very high level, there's a lot of back and forth going on Pell eligibility. There are talks about changing eligibility for degree-seeking students based on how many credits they enroll every year, which can be pretty devastating if it goes through. On a very maybe the smallest of silver-like lines is potentially opening Pell for short-term credentials. There's also additionally a real possible threat to other programs like the Federal Work Study, TRIO, and Gear Up. All of these, again, critical in supporting students, especially from low-income backgrounds, to access post-secondary education. If you can click one more time, let's go to the state level. The recently released state budget cut funding that supports students in not only graduating from high school, but also transitioning into post-secondary education. We saw millions of dollars were cut for nonprofits and other entities who provided critical supports to especially marginalized populations, including foster youth, youth experiencing homelessness, opportunity youth, BIPOC, and as well as first-gen students. Additionally, we also saw some cuts to dual credit and career-connected learning supports as well. I'll also mention that the award amounts for the Washington College Grant or the WA grant there's some modifications happening for some students starting as early as this coming academic year, with additional modifications rolling down in the next 3 years, especially if there are students who are attending our private, for-profit, and not-for-profit institutions. Finally, one more, if we can click, we can look at the local level. We are definitely seeing reduction in force across the state at schools and school districts, as well as, unfortunately, some closure of programs at some of our higher ed institutions. So if you can go to the next slide, a very quick summary of what we are seeing is, of course, the situation is grim. There's a lot of uncertainty and instability across the federal, state, and local levels. I think the key thing is we are facing severe constraints, not just on fiscal resources, but also obviously that translates into human resources across the state. And a very complex financial aid landscape, I think, thanks to which most of us have our jobs, is unfortunately becoming even more complex, which is not the direction we want to be moving in. With that, I'm just looking at the time, and it looks like we might have a few minutes for if there are any unanswered questions. And I can also take a look at the chat. Looks like we answered most of it. I don't know, maybe there's a question for Colleen in case you know the answer. I think there's a question if the data you presented, is it separated by gender as well? Do we have any data on that? I think specifically they're asking, Laura is asking, are we losing white boys and girls at the same rate?
So we haven't been able to do that analysis in this cycle. We several years ago did the projections by male and female, but I think a lot has changed since then, and we're planning on in the next year or so putting out an updated series of projections by gender. So similarly, we're thinking of those questions as well.
Thanks, Colleen. And thank you, Patricia, for adding some additional context to what we're seeing.
Rati, there is a question from Alexander Hall in the Q&A.
Okay, I'm just reading that. The amount of credit. Oh, yeah, that's so great. So the question is, I can actually read that out loud. Thanks, Alexander. I think they're saying that we shared some information about the proportion of high school students who enroll in some kind of dual credit. Do we have information about the amount of credit students in those programs pursue and or complete? For instance, students taking AP courses, how many does each student take on average? What I can share is that the ERDC dashboard and some of the reports coming out from them does include at least the credits that the students are getting on the K-12 side. So obviously dual credit includes getting K-12 credits as well as college credits or higher ed institution credits. There is, and I know there's data on K-12 credits. We're not yet there where we are able to, I think, share on data on higher ed side, but I know it's work in progress. So thanks for that question. All right, so maybe with that we can move to the next slide. But yeah, please keep your questions coming and we'll try to answer them, via texting or later. So yeah, this was a lot of information, and I would love to take a moment to tie it all together. The first thing I want to highlight is that the very populations in Washington who have historically enrolled at lower rates after graduating high school are the ones whose population will grow in the next 15 years. So especially our Hispanic, Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander and Black students need all the supports we can provide. Additionally, in this moment, students, it's the landscape is pretty much devastated to a large extent. So students have lost the support systems that help them with these transitions. They have fewer advisors, fewer college access advocates, and there's a greater stress on counselors. Unfortunately, this can actually get worse in the near future, depending on what happens at the federal level. On the bright side, we also know that students, through the conversations we had with the work we did with Ideas 42, and Dan will talk a little bit about that, and in other surveys that have been done in the state, they have consistently shared that they do intend to pursue post-secondary education. But there's a gap between intention and action. And that's where behavioral science has a role to play. I want to highlight that we've had some great policy solutions in the state, but to reap the benefits of those policy solutions, like expanded state financial aid, access to dual credits, etc., we also need solutions in the realm of practice. What you'll hear from Ideas 42 is within that realm of practice. Now, let me warn you, they will come across as maybe common sense solutions because they are. But understanding the context will truly help us appreciate the nuances. And to successfully implement these, we will require commitment and deep collaboration among all of us. So again, truly thank you for being here. So finally, my last point is that these behavioral science informed strategies will directly empower students and families by further removing uncertainty and increasing transparency in the transition process. With that, I will pass it to Dan.
Thanks, Rathi. All right, so what is Ideas 42? You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Well, we're a nonprofit behavioral design lab that partners with colleges, school systems, and public agencies across the country to improve student outcomes, especially around college access and success. We work at the intersection of two fields, behavioral science and human-centered design. Behavioral science is about how the context around us shapes our decisions, from ones as important as whether or not someone decides to enroll in college, to ones as small as whether or not you choose to keep your camera on during a Zoom call. Human-centered design is about building solutions with people's lived experiences in mind, not just relying on expert intuition. So instead of asking how we can fix students, behavioral design asks, how can we fix the environment around them? It means looking at the barriers in their path, not their mindset, and finding ways to remove or rework them. Now, this is a simple but powerful idea. We can't rewire someone's brain, but we can rewire the context they're in. And when I say context, I mean all the small features of an experience that shape behavior. What's visible, what's confusing, what's required, what feels urgent. That's where behavioral design starts, by identifying what in the environment is nudging students off course and how we can adjust it to keep them on track. Now, I want to show everyone how we applied this approach with WASAC. Our shared goal with WASAC was clear: help more students access and use the Washington Grant to boost post-secondary enrollment. But we didn't just want more students enrolling. We wanted them enrolling right after high school. Next slide, please. Why did we want them enrolling right after high school? Well, because students who enroll immediately are much more likely to persist and earn a credential. Right now, just 55% of Washington students do that. And as Rathi mentioned earlier, that number varies significantly by race and ethnicity. So improving that rate, especially for those most impacted, is a real opportunity that we wanted to focus on. And there were a few reasons we wanted to focus on the Washington Grant specifically. It's a powerful tool. It can cover full tuition for many students in Washington, yet it remains underutilized. Many students and families still haven't heard of it, and even when they have, they often don't engage because the information feels vague, overwhelming, or just too good to be true. So just raising awareness isn't enough. We need to close the gap between knowing and acting. And that was the starting point for this work. Although our goal was always to generate insights that could apply well beyond the Washington Grant and beyond high school students. So to tackle this, we followed a two-phase process. First diagnosis, then design. We started by asking, why aren't more eligible students enrolling? Then in the design phase, we used those insights to build practical, low-barrier ideas that could help students take action, especially around the Washington Grant. Everything you'll see today is grounded in what we heard from the field and tested with students, parents, and practitioners across the state. We intentionally focused our fieldwork in districts where the majority of students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. We conducted in-depth listening tours and diagnostic surveys to move beyond assumptions and hear directly from students, families, and staff. We didn't just ask what people want. We studied where they got stuck, what confuses them, and what they respond to. This approach helped us identify not just the barriers, but the specific moments where better design could unlock action. But before we show you what we heard, we'd love to hear from all of you. You've probably worked with students navigating this exact decision. So I just want to take a quick poll. Which of the following do you think are barriers preventing Washington students from enrolling in post-secondary programs? Feel free to select more than one because, as you know, many students experience multiple barriers. All right, we'll give everyone a few more seconds. Good participation. All right. Perfect. So yeah, it seems like a pretty even split with students and families think it's unaffordable being the big winner, or I guess loser in this case. But ultimately, you're all correct. All of these surface in our research. They often overlap and they're rarely experienced in isolation. Now, to be clear, these are not the only barriers impacting students and families, but these 5 kept coming up again and again, no matter who we talked to or where they were. So to reiterate, when speaking with students, parents, high school staff, and college staff, these are the 5 behavioral barriers that showed up most consistently. Students don't feel ready for college. Students and families think college is unaffordable. College feels like a risky investment. The application process is unclear. And the process is full of hassles. And just to clarify, when I say college, I'm talking about all post-secondary options, not just 4-year degrees. Now, none of these are especially surprising, right? They're actually pretty intuitive. But here's where we want to go a bit deeper. These barriers are just the tip of the iceberg. To truly address them, we need to understand what's underneath, what's happening in the environment or context that makes these barriers show up. But before we show you what that looks like, I just want to play a quick game. So humor me, if you will. So we're going to show you 7 different ideas. And if you were designing a solution to address the barriers that you see on your screen, which of the following would you choose? So we left the barriers up on the screen in case you want to refer back to them. I think you can choose multiple, but try to limit it to 1 or 2. You might be influenced to select all 7, but try to limit it to 1 or 2. Just pick the one that you think would be most effective to address any or all of those 5 barriers listed out there. All right, they're still rolling in. Give everyone a few more seconds. And I want you to remember what you selected because we're going to come back to this. Maybe 1 or 2 more seconds. All right, seems like they slowed down. Perfect. All right, I'm going to take a screenshot of that so I have the, I'm going to refer back to this in a bit. All right. Now let's actually go beneath the surface. So when we say a student doesn't feel ready or assumes that college is unaffordable, if we want to go to the next slide, please. Sorry, I know Abby's doing a fantastic job of managing the polls and the slides, so thank you. When we say a student doesn't feel ready or assumes that college is unaffordable, what's that really about? It's not just about beliefs or attitudes. It's about what they see, what they hear, and what the system shows them or doesn't show them. These are what we call redesignable elements, small but powerful features of the context that shape behavior. Here are a few that came up across multiple barriers. Financial aid is confusing, buried, or invisible. Deadlines are hard to find and easy to miss. No one breaks the process down into manageable steps. Most people don't hear about the Washington grant from someone they trust. Now, these are just 4 among countless redesignable elements that make up a student's context, but these are particularly influential in students' decisions and actions around enrollment. So now that we've surfaced some of these deeper contextual elements, let's go back to our game. This time, knowing what's behind the barriers, which idea would you choose? Again, try to limit it to 1 or 2. You can select the same idea that you did last time or change your selection based on the updated information that we shared. And we kept the redesignable elements on the screen in case you want to refer back to those. Keep in mind though, we want our ideas to address obviously the barriers, but we specifically want them to address the underlying reasons why those barriers exist. All right, we'll give people a bit more time. I know that was a lot of info to digest in a pretty short amount of time. So I think we had like 75% participation in the last poll. We're getting close. All right, a few more seconds. If you can't decide, just pick one. All right, I think that's probably good. Okay, so everyone can see those results on the screen, and I took a screenshot of the previous results. Interesting. All right, so we had 38%. I'll just go in order from top to bottom. We had 38% go to 35% for video walkthroughs. We had 16% go to 7% for financial aid comparison calculator. 16%, 16%, so nothing changed for that third idea. We had 28% go to 37% for the reminder and outreach system. We had 34% go to 31% for the community ambassadors, 28% go to 21% for the personal pathways checklist. And then it looks like they kind of decreased across the board. We had 41% go to 29% for the data-driven tools. So it looks like they kind of decreased across the board, except for the reminder and outreach system. So it's interesting. Maybe people selected more options in the first go around. But yeah, so just some further context. These are all real ideas that came from our shortlist. Some clearly stood out to you all more than others. And I understand you didn't have all the details around each of those ideas. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we understand the context behind the barrier, we give ourselves the chance to make better design decisions. That's what behavioral design does. It gives us a roadmap for changing the context, not the individual. So you just got a bit of a sneak peek. But what did we actually do with all of those insights and all of those redesignable elements? Well, together with WASAC, we generated over 120 potential solutions. From there, we narrowed that list to 30 that were promising, behaviorally informed, and grounded in the lived experience of students, families, and staff. Then we brought those 30 back to the community. Through a design survey, nearly 400 students and parents helped us identify which ones resonated most. And this list of 11 represents the ideas that rose to the top because A, they were loved across multiple groups of stakeholders, and B, they tackled real friction points in the context. In other words, they best addressed our redesignable elements. Now, we didn't prototype all 11, and I can't get into all 11, but we're going to talk about the top 3, which we did explore more deeply, so that you can see what translating insights into action actually looks like. Of the 11 most promising ideas, we selected these 3 to prototype: the financial aid comparison calculator, the personal pathways checklist, and the reminder and outreach system. These weren't just our favorites. As I just mentioned, they were ideas that stood out across different groups of stakeholders in the design survey. They also represented different kinds of challenges, which made them great candidates for early prototyping. I'll go a bit deeper on the first 2, and then I'll pass it to Rati to talk about how WASAC is already starting to implement the reminder and outreach system. So let's start with the first idea we prototyped, a financial aid comparison calculator, designed not just to give numbers, but to shift beliefs. One problem we heard over and over, students don't know what college will actually cost, and they often assume the worst. They've seen sticker prices that feel impossible, they've heard debt horror stories, and very few have been told clearly what they might qualify for, especially when it comes to the Washington grant. So we built this tool to make financial aid feel real, simple, and trustworthy. Now, yes, financial aid calculators already exist, so why design another one? Because most of the ones we reviewed required too much input or delivered numbers with no context. Some emphasized how much aid a student could get, but skipped the bottom line. Others showed the total cost, but left out which parts were covered. Not to mention, this was the most popular idea among both students and parents we surveyed. So here's an example of a calculator that gives precise estimates, but still leaves a lot of questions. Students wonder things like, what do I actually owe? Is this aid or a loan? Even a tool like this, designed to clarify, can end up overwhelming or misleading if it assumes too much background knowledge. And in other cases, calculators focus on gift aid, but don't clarify total costs. It's not always clear whether this is what you get, what you do or don't need to pay back, or how pathways might be different from one another. This kind of confusion reinforces the fear that college is unaffordable, even when support like the Washington Grant is available. That brings us to our prototype. It starts with a simple orientation screen, which is key. We wanted to reduce drop-off from the very beginning by clearly explaining what this tool will and won't do. Note that because this is just a prototype, what you see will be a bit rough around the edges, but all of that could be cleaned up pretty easily. Then, students are asked to enter only the minimum personal info needed, as well as some of their pathway preferences. I know I'm going through this kind of quickly, but I want to make sure I leave time for Rati at the end. And then on that third page, they get a personalized results page that shows estimated net cost, a breakdown of gift aid, loans, and out-of-pocket cost, as well as whether they're likely eligible for the Washington Grant. Critically, we used plain language, tooltips, and bold visual cues to help students focus on what really matters. One differentiating feature of this prototype is the ability of students and parents to compare costs across different schools and different pathways. Students can enter up to 2 pathways and 4 program options at the same time. This kind of framing helps students see that college isn't just one expensive path. It's a set of options with different costs and different potential outcomes. It creates space for deliberation and exploration without being overwhelming. Let's look at this student, for example. They're torn between technical college and 2-year college. And they wanted to get a better sense of what they should expect from a cost perspective. I think that might be on the next slide there. They're quickly able to see the price discrepancy between the technical college they chose and also what 2-year college might cost them. They're also able to see that one of the technical colleges they were considering isn't eligible for the Washington Grant, which is important information that they otherwise probably wouldn't be aware of. Now, over the next 4 slides, I've highlighted specific features that would help prevent users of this calculator from being overwhelmed and confused, addressing one of our main barriers. First, we limited how much personal or sensitive information students have to enter. Now, that might reduce the precision of federal aid estimates, but the goal here is accessibility and clarity, not perfection. Second, we use drop-down menus tied to each pathway, like technical colleges or apprenticeships, so students could discover options they might not have known about. And finally, every input field is paired with a short, plain language explanation. Could you go back 1 slide, please? Perfect. Actually, 1 more. There we go. So this matters because if students don't understand what a question is asking, they're much more likely to give up than go hunting for an answer. These are all small design choices, but they help reduce anxiety, lower the cognitive load, and keep students moving through the tool. Now, on the results screen, we emphasized one number up front, estimated net cost per year. That's the number most students and parents care about. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The estimated net cost is a number most students and parents care about, but they often have trouble locating it or interpreting it. We also added hover text, so if a student's curious about what net cost actually means, they can find out without cluttering the main view. And this layout allows students to compare across pathways, like 4-year versus technical college, without having to explore every program's separate website, which can get pretty burdensome after a while. And then on the next slide, you can see how we broke down both costs and aid, using color and layout to make the information more scannable. When students were missing out on the Washington Grant, for example, if the program they were interested in wasn't eligible, we flagged it clearly in red. And when context mattered, like with apprenticeships where income might offset costs, we added a note to prevent misinterpretation. The goal here was to give students just enough information to take the next step without sending them into information overload. Finally, we wanted the tool to adjust intelligently when students made selections that didn't align. For example, choosing on-campus housing for a school that doesn't offer it. So we added alerts when something might be off to help students recalibrate. And throughout, we used labeling and sectioning to clearly separate gift aid from loans so students know what they'd have to pay back. Now, these all may seem like small adjustments, but they make a huge difference in whether a student leaves feeling confident or confused. This prototype is far from perfect, and building a comprehensive tool like this might take some time, But there's also an opportunity for individual schools and programs to apply some of these insights to their own tools. I know I went through that kind of quickly. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our next idea. I do see some questions popping in the chat, so I can answer them after this section, or one of my colleagues, Cassie, is on the call as well, so she might be able to chime in. But next up is the personal pathways checklist, another one of our top-rated ideas. This one addresses a different kind of barrier. While the calculator tackled financial confusion and ambiguity, among other things, the checklist was designed to help students take the next step when they're feeling unsure, stuck, or unmotivated. We heard from so many students that they didn't know if they were on track or what that even meant. They weren't sure what deadlines to pay attention to or what they should be doing if they weren't planning to apply to a four-year college right away. This prototype is our response to that. It breaks the journey down into manageable steps and lets students explore different pathways at their own pace, with more clarity and less judgment. And we developed multiple versions to test how it could work at different levels of complexity, from a static handout to an interactive digital tool. Again, you might be thinking, like you thought with the calculator, don't students already have resources and college planning tools? What's so different about this one? We heard a few consistent issues from students' families and even school staff. First, counselors are doing incredible work, but they're often stretched thin. It's just not possible for them to provide personalized, detailed support to every student. Second, most existing tools are one size fits all. They give broad instructions, but don't reflect the reality that students are considering a wide range of post-secondary paths, from apprenticeships to trade school to 2-year and 4-year colleges. Third, many students and parents told us that they felt totally unprepared. The process was confusing, overwhelming, and full of ambiguous steps. And like with the calculator, it was one of the most popular ideas among students and families. To make this checklist more actionable and inclusive, we prototyped 3 different versions with varying levels of feasibility, from low lift to more sophisticated. You'll see how each version builds on the last, but the core idea was the same. Make the pathway to post-secondary feel visible, manageable, and relevant, regardless of what a student wants to do next. This first version is the simplest. It's essentially a worksheet that lays out different action steps for different goals, like going to a 4-year college, a 2-year college, or going into an apprenticeship. It doesn't assume a student already knows which path they want. In fact, it's designed to help students compare steps side by side and realize that they don't have to figure everything out right away. The second version of the Personal Pathways Checklist is an interactive digital version that's built to be more usable, more digestible, and more actionable than a static PDF or flyer. The structure here is designed to do a few key things. First, help students understand what they need to do. Then, break that down into manageable steps. And finally, give them the how, with links, deadlines, and tools right at their fingertips. It's designed to feel like a single source of truth in what can otherwise be a really fragmented, overwhelming process. We'll walk through a few features we think make it especially promising. First, the checklist is customized by pathway, so students applying to a 4-year college won't see the same instructions as someone heading to an apprenticeship or a 2-year degree. That means more relevance, less clutter. Second, we've chunked the steps into 3 big phases: prepare to apply, and enroll. That's a small change that creates a huge improvement in usability. It reduces cognitive load and gives students a sense of momentum. We also built in general timelines, like when to start each phase and specific deadlines when they're available. And also, we put a download button in there at the bottom so students can save the checklist or print it out. We wanted it to work whether a student is online at school or offline at home. Each step on the checklist can expand to show more detail, and that detail is really where the checklist starts doing heavy lifting. Here's a good example. Under Apply for Financial Aid, it doesn't just say file the FAFSA. It walks through exactly what students need to do based on their citizenship or residency status. It includes links, clarifies what forms are needed, and even flags which students might need to complete the WASFA instead. And for steps that require even more support, like how to complete a FAFSA, we link out to an additional resource that breaks the process down even further. It's not just a to-do list, it's a tool that helps students take the next step with confidence, and that's what makes it behaviorally powerful. Now, the third version of our checklist takes personalization to the next level. Instead of just letting students browse general checklists, this version builds a customized plan based on the schools and programs a student is actually interested in. That means the deadline, steps, and links reflect their post-secondary path and not anyone else's. It cuts through the noise and shows them only what they need to know, nothing more. Let's take a look at how this would actually work for students. Now, when students first access their personalized checklist, they're asked to enter just a few key details. They already know: their name, contact info, high school. Then they select which schools or type of schools they're applying to. If they're not sure yet, there's an option to explore and add later. This step helps tailor the whole experience. It also links directly to the financial aid calculator if they want to compare costs before making a decision. That way, there's a potential for the checklist and our other prototype, the calculator, to work together, not in isolation. From there, the checklist is automatically populated with the relevant steps and deadlines, based on the actual schools and start dates they selected. Notice how the first item is already checked off. That's intentional. Behavioral research shows that people are more likely to keep going when they feel like they've already made progress. We also allow flexibility in deadlines. Students might begin this process in August, but they might also start this process in November, and deadlines need to adjust accordingly to stay relevant. That prevents them from seeing old dates that no longer apply or feeling like they've already fallen behind. Finally, each step in the checklist includes clear instructions and helpful links. If it's a complicated task, like submitting the FAFSA or WASFA, the checklist provides a short explanation and links out to a more detailed guide. There's also the option to define confusing jargon, like what FAFSA even means, without crowding the page. That makes the checklist feel supportive and not overwhelming. So students always know what to do next, how to do it, and when it's due. No extra digging required. Again, I know I went through that kind of quickly. I'm happy to answer questions in the chat. I have one more slide and then I'll throw it over to Rathi. And I want to talk about the reminder and outreach system briefly. This was the one that a lot of you changed your answers to from the second poll to the third poll after seeing those redesignable elements. And this is also the last idea we prototyped. The reminder and outreach system, designed to push the right information to the right people at the right time. It's all about using the communication channels students, parents, and staff are already on, whether that's email, text, or even school platforms, to surface critical reminders about financial aid and enrollment steps. I'm going to hand it off to Rathi, who's going to share more about how WASAC's already bringing this idea to life.
Thank you, Dan. Also, thank you so much for the engagement that's happening in the Q&A and the chat. I think great ideas. I do want to emphasize that all of these that we are showing right now, as Dan has mentioned, these are still very much in the prototype phase, right? So this work happened sometime from last fall to, and in fact, some of the work is still happening. And we've finished some of the prototyping earlier, like maybe a couple months ago. So it's very fresh. And this is exactly the conversation that we're hoping to have, so we can, see what is really of interest to the community, to all of us in the state, and what should we prioritize in the next months, years, maybe. So with that, if you can go to the next slide. Similar to the other two ideas, you may be wondering, like, are we not already messaging and sharing information with students and families? Yes, absolutely. And it can be vastly improved. What we heard from students and families was that the more proactive communication they can receive, the better it is for them. What we also heard them say is that currently they receive information from many sources, right? Like from their school counselors, their Avid, Get Up, other teachers, advisors in the classroom or in the building, as well as tools like Autobot, that's WASAC's chatbot, right? And the critical thing was all of those don't always align. This leads to them getting confused and missing deadlines. So that was one good reason for us to really dive deeper into this. Additionally, we at WASAC were also looking to take the opportunity in implementing House Bill 2214 that passed last session, and streamlining our messaging with our partners. What the bill allows us to do is message to students in 10th grade and beyond whose families access food benefits that they are guaranteed maximum Washington grant should they choose to pursue post-secondary education. So if you can go to the next slide. What we received from Ideas 42 on this was a comprehensive communications planning guide. It laid out the steps to create a coordinated communications campaign that would start in 8th grade and it goes all the way to summer after high school. We start with an early awareness campaign of even what the WA grant is in 8th grade, build momentum in 9th grade with the ability to guarantee aid in 10th grade and beyond for eligible students, or continue to refine messaging for others. 11th graders begin to prepare for action, and in 12th grade, it's all about action and completion. We don't stop there, but continue to bridge the gap during summer after high school. The way this is structured, it allows WASAC to closely partner with institutions and school districts or high schools to layer messaging, making it consistent, timely, and relevant to the student. This alignment of information is not just for financial aid, but can also be for other post-secondary steps like admissions. A key piece of this guide is clear steps to personalize information. And I forgot to share that the target audience is not just students, but also parents as well as high school staff. So everyone is sort of getting that, aligned, consistent messaging, and via platforms they already use. So it's not like one other thing they need to learn or navigate. So with that, if we go to the next slide. Like I mentioned, just quickly, one other thing about the platform or the communications guide itself is that the guide has clear goals for messaging. It lays out when should we message, whether it's a fall of 8th grade or the spring of 10th grade. What should we message in those times, right? Like, is it about awareness? Is it about guarantee? Is it about actionable steps? Who should the message come from? Who is that trusted messenger? Could be local trusted messengers like counselors and nonprofits, or institutions, or the state. And how should we message? What's the medium we must use? Is it emails, texts, or something else? So where WASAC is right now is we've already incorporated some of these strategies in our college access work that includes messaging through Autobot. Currently, we're just wrapping a user test with 20 high school counselors across the state who've helped us refine the messages for better clarity, targeted to the students and families. Once we incorporate that, we will have a communications planning guide with finalized messages and all of that who, when, what, how, fitted into it, that can be shared out. Additionally, we're also already partnering in one region to layer this with the institution and the K-12 partners' own communications, with the goal that from a student's perspective, they should receive what they need when they need it from trusted sources. So on the back end, while as systems we coordinate, on the student and families end, it should be a seamless flow of information. At least that's the goal. With that, I invite all of you for more conversations. But before we do that, I think we do have time for a quick pulse check on these ideas. We have 3 questions. We'll start with the first one. A very broad question since it's very much in the prototype phase. How interested are you in the financial aid comparison calculator on a scale of 0 to 5? Thank you for your participation. I see quite a few folks responding. Truly, I think at this point in time, with about 10, 11 minutes remaining in this conversation, it's, as I said, it's a pulse check just for us to get a sense of, where you all are on these ideas. We have about 64% participation. Maybe we give it a few seconds. All right, maybe we can end this poll.
Rati, you're
I
going
see
to
at
see
least-
all 3 of the questions together.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. Thank you, Abby. So yeah, so it looks like you're answering all 3, which I didn't even realize. Yeah.
And it looks like participation is pretty consistent across all 3 questions. So I'll go ahead and share the results.
Thank you. All right, it looks like we have slightly more interest for the personal pathways checklist and the reminder and outreach system, some interest as well for the financial aid calculator. So that is fantastic. Again, yeah, I know that was a lot of information, and we can go to the next slide. I truly thank you for being part of this conversation. It's only the beginning. And maybe since we do have some time, I can just, pause for a few to see if there's anything else in the chat or in the Q&A that we missed. Doesn't look like that.
I think there's lots of great suggestions and feedback coming in.
I see that. Yes. Yeah. I truly appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Since we do have a few seconds, a few minutes, I will encourage you to think of these solutions, which you already are doing, but even beyond, like not just for students graduating from high school, but these can be absolutely relevant for opportunity youth as well as adult students. I do want to put a link in the chat. Strada did a survey of adult students, and they found very similar barriers, and their recommendations had some of the things we are talking about today. So please feel free to look at that as well. And because when we think of Washingtonian students, we of course ought to be thinking of all of our students, especially if we want to get to that goal of 70% of attainment. Yeah, with that, looks like we will actually be able to close a little early. You have our contact details here. Dan from Ideas 42, thank you so much for being here. Colleen from WICHE, thank you again. And my info as well. Have a great rest of your week. And we'll hang out here for a couple minutes if anybody wants to. Yes, the recording will be sent out. Yes.